what about the human body itself? I mean, of course, here the body cannot exist without the brain, and so just for simple survival, I mean, so you can see that dopamine is something that's related to rewards. It is not something that's very primitive. It's not, it may not be, it may be perhaps essential for survival, but maybe the rewards is more to thrive rather than to simply live. Okay? So can we try to understand, are there similar neurotransmitters, are there similar mechanisms that allow the human body to, humans as a species to simply survive? We've talked about evolution. So how is it that we have come to this point? I mean, how is it that you and I in this form have continued to remain this way for so many, I don't know, millennia perhaps? So again, a lot of fundamental research has gone on into saying what are the neurotransmitters that are responsible to ensure that we survive as a species. So and what are the models that have been proposed in order to explain why is it that these systems have been so successful? And this is my cue into selecting this particular topic, because if you look at these words here, negative feedback, feed forward control, and all that, so these are terms that we use on an everyday basis in the domain of control systems and theory. All our mathematical results, when we talk about designing controllers for engineering systems, are based on these primary concepts. So this was my positive reinforcement, if you will, in selecting this particular topic, because I know that I can maybe say something of some value at the end. So just to very briefly explain what it is that these systems actually do. So these are the neurotransmitters that basically ensure that your body is kept in a very stable condition. So there are several variables that are typically controlled here. So a few of them are like body temperature, blood sugar, blood pressure, and so on. So there are actually internal feedback mechanisms within the human body that make sure that these variables are kept at some balanced temperature in order to ensure survival. Okay? So that's the role of these neurotransmitters. So just to give you an example here, so control of blood sugar. How is it that our blood sugar is maintained at a particular level? What are the internal mechanisms that are responsible in order to ensure that this happens? So if there is an increase in blood sugar, then there are neurotransmitters that trigger the release of insulin that kind of dissolves this excess blood sugar. And if there is a decrease in blood sugar, then there are other neurotransmitters that are released which ensure that more glucose is fed into the bloodstream so that the level of blood sugar comes back to what is considered as optimal. Now, it is the variations in these feedback mechanisms that has led to all these other issues, things like stress and diseases of adaptation, which is diabetes, which is something that I'm sure a lot of our family members here suffer from, for which they take external medication and so on. And another term that has been identified here in this topic is what is known as allostasis. So allostasis is the change in the stability levels over time. So my father, who is now close to 70 years old, does not have the same wherewithal to regulate these variables the same way that I can. I'm close to 40, he's about 70. So the human body is able to adapt to things like aging. You know, how are these internal feedback mechanisms change when some of the variables change? So this homeostasis is for a body taken in itself. So allostasis is a term that has been coined to see how these stable values change over time. Maybe for a person my father's age, some of these levels, some of these variable levels could change. So for me, maybe a blood sugar of some number is maybe satisfactory, but for him maybe say 1.5 times that particular number or a smaller ratio is what would be acceptable. Now, how is it that the human body or the human brain is able to take care of these variations? So some of these concepts have therefore been given the name of allostasis. So I want to point out that this work is actually not very trivial. I mean, people have won Nobel Prizes for this work, and this work has started in 1920s, 1930s, and so on. The identification of these neurotransmitters, the very crucial role that they play in the regulation of the human body and to ensure its survival. Again, I told you my cue to choosing this topic is the topic of research known as cybernetics. So this was a term that was coined in the 50s by a bunch of interdisciplinary researchers. Maybe you've heard of the term, you've heard of the name Norbert Wiener. He was the one who proposed this term cybernetics. So there was collaborative work between biologists, neuroscientists, as well as electrical engineers in identifying some of the similarities between what the human body is seen and whether it can actually be used in intelligent machines. Okay, so that's what led to that term here. Okay, so can we now understand this role of homeostasis, which has been identified as a phenomena that is there to ensure survival in context of the machine zone. So again, I'm going back to what we started off with. So I started off by simply giving you a lot of statements that were made by people. Now can we understand the machine zone as an altered homeostatic balance level? Okay, so I've told you that people actually spend hours on length in front of these gambling machines. I mean, I'm sure all of us have been victim of spending 2-3 hours continuously on social networking sites and other such technologies. Why is it? So why is it that we are able to focus so much on this for such a long time? So you can think of this as an altered stable level in our brain. And so again, I've also given you some background from psychology and neuroscience that actually enables you to appreciate what it is that is changing when we spend such extended durations on these systems. So again, I told you that this is what interested me in this topic, the role of negative feedback. So people they change their actions, they change their sensory inputs in such a way that they make sure they continue to play for a really long time. So that's a negative feedback that is used by the users themselves. And there is positive feedback that is enabled by technology. So technology will keep on upping the ante each time you move ahead in playing when you're continuing to play. Now this has been seen, the first example that's typically studied in positive feedback is the game of Tetris, which maybe many of you have played some time ago. So you've seen that if you play this game for a long time, the rate at which those bricks fall increases. So your challenges keep increasing the longer you play on them. That's positive feedback. Yeah, please.
I mean, I've also noticed that, apart from that zone that you're in when you're actually on the site, even if you're not, there's this almost involuntary reaching for a phone or or even like a 2-second scroll or
exactly
for someone. So it doesn't mean that you're constantly.
See, that's you're not. But then see you remember those few lines that I stated before, that everybody is distracted. You're always thinking about it. That's because of the variable ratio scheduling. It's not that every 30 seconds you're going to get an email or you're going to get a message or something. You want to constantly check whether you're getting something. That's your reward system telling you. If I get something, I know I'm going to feel happy. And they've figured it out that it should not be in a fixed schedule. It should be intermittent. It should be variable ratio. Even the design of the pull to refresh, it's so simple. All you have to do is move your thumb by a few and you can see whether that is your stimulus. I mean, and then you will finally see whether you're going to get a reward or not. It has become so simple.
And I think that can be directly attributed to the smartphone, right? Like even the fact that you are technically constantly connected even if you're not on the device.
Yeah, so that's what I said. So actually, if you look at the newspaper article that I had cited earlier which focused on Mr. Harris, he talks about detoxing workshops. There is something known as a National Day of Unplugging. Okay, so where people spend a day without their cell phones, and I'm sure all of us have received enough WhatsApp forwards that people are sitting at a restaurant, there's a basket in front of you, people all put their phones. The first person to pick up their phone and answer a call or message pays everybody's bill. Right? Maybe you've seen that. So it seems like it's a fairly severe thing. Okay, this is the body that is at rest or that is at a stable condition. Now can we see if something similar exists for the brain itself? So this is what has been termed as it's somewhere here. It's been termed as the default mode of the brain. Okay, so even when you're asleep or even when a person is under anesthesia, it has been identified that the brain is actually not at rest. So this was identified as early as 60 AD. Seneca was a Roman philosopher. So he said that the fact that the body is lying down is no reason for supposing that the mind is at peace. Rest is far from restful. Okay, so the brain is actually constantly thinking, or there's a lot of activity that is going on even when you're under anesthesia, or when you're or even when you're asleep. Now why? Can we explain why is it that there is so much neuronal activity that happens even in such cases? Like, see, suppose I don't undertake any activity. I sit in this room for, you've all been sitting here for more than 1.5 hours, and I'm assuming that my talk has been interesting enough that your dopamine systems are being rewarded in some way. But I'm sure after some time you will feel hungry, right? So there are things that will say, okay, look, I'm feeling hungry. That's a more primitive need. I should go satisfy it. What happens when you're asleep? What is the brain actually doing? So there are several theories that have been, again, proposed here. One of them is daydreams. There is actually a lot of work that is being going on these days about mind-wandering behavior. Can we explain why is it that you get distracted? Why is it that the mind wanders? And so on. Is there a need for the mind to do this? And to maintain a balance between excitatory and inhibitory inputs. So now inhibition is something that I think requires a little bit of effort in understanding what is inhibition. You are actually, whenever you take an action, you may take one particular action, but you also do not perform several other things. It's like when you're crossing a road. You don't cross when a bus is coming in front of you, right? You actually stop and see, and then you cross the road. So these are the inhibitory actions. Inhibition plays an equally important role as does excitation in actually telling you to do some particular thing. Stopping you from doing something seems to be more as important as actually doing it. Okay, so the brain is has been, so all these activities typically happen in order to strike a balance here. And perhaps one important thing, this is what I want to end with and give you one other slide, is that during rest, the brain is actually working to predict what it could potentially see in the future. Okay, so this is where the concept of learning and memory comes in. It actually processes all the stimuli, all the sensory inputs that it has processed over time, and takes suitable actions for you to predict what it is actually going to, what you can potentially do in the future. Okay, so it has been termed as a Bayesian inference engine. Do you know what is the Bayes rule in probability theory? Are some of you familiar with this? People with an engineering or a mathematical background could. So the Bayes rule is one of the most fundamental theorems that have been proved in probability theory, which basically says that in a nutshell, what it enables us to do is to update our beliefs based on new events and new occurrences. So I mean, when I teach a class in probability here at the institute, and I always give the example of cricketers. So imagine that you had, you did not know who Sachin Tendulkar was. I mean, before he reached his status, as we know of it today. He's a debutant. He's just come out to play, and maybe you want to know whether he's going to get out in the first ball or not. Okay, so the odds are fairly high. I mean, either he's going to play, or he's either going to get out or not get out in the first ball. But that's your first belief. So the probability that you think he's going to get out in the first ball is, say, 50%. But then now you have seen him play over years. You know how much of a talented batsman he is. Now this is all the information that you have collected over time. And it is based on this information that you can now update your belief that when Tendulkar comes to bat, you know that the odds of him getting out in the first ball are very, very low. It started off as 50%. Now it has come down to a very small number. It doesn't mean that he hasn't. I'm sure he has enough golden ducks to his name. But the odds of that happening are very low, primarily because you know what sort of a player he is. So this is the fundamental, this is a very simple explanation about the Bayes rule, and this is what the brain has been attributed to be doing when it is at rest. I have had a series of experiences. Now how can I use these experiences to update my beliefs or my actions about what is going to happen in the future? Okay, so some different things to think about. How does the brain do this, or why does it even take these actions? Why does it have to do all these things about predicting what the future is going to bring and so on? Are there theories that have been proposed to explain this? Yes, there is one, and I'll tell you why I have chosen this particular one too. This is something known as the minimization of free energy principle. Basically what it says is that the brain works to minimize the element of surprise. Okay? An improbable outcome is surprising. Now, leaving these few lines aside, I want you to pay attention to this phrase, again, which has been taken by the book about gamblers. So here they say that at the machines I do know I'm going to win or lose. If you can't rely on the machine, then you might as well be in the human world where you have no predictability. Okay? So the human world for these gamblers has become so unpredictable, so surprising, that they want to seek a refuge in what technology offers them. So if you were to subscribe to this minimum energy principle, which has been used to explain the brain, so the brain is always going to work to ensure that you receive no surprises. Okay? And the belief of all these gamblers is that my life has become so unpredictable that I'm going to seek a refuge in these machines where I know that I'm not going to have any surprises. So the brain autonomously is actually telling these people that, look, go spend some time here. You're not going to have any surprises. You are going to minimize the free energy that is present in your brain. It is actually asking you to take these actions. Okay? So again, the reason why I have chosen this particular theory, I'm sure there are several others that have been proposed to explain the overall function of the brain. I mean, right now I've only spoken to you about the dopamine transmitters and other neurotransmitters there, but what about the overall structure of the brain? There is a reason why I have chosen this. It's primarily because it uses dynamical systems theory, which is again very, very closely related to my experience in control systems theory, where we use very similar approaches, very similar language in trying to understand how systems work. So in a way, my choice of selecting this free energy principle to understand the brain is I am minimizing my own element of surprise. I am minimizing my own lacunae in understanding how the brain works. It's up to you to agree with me or not, but this is evidence in front of you. Okay, so you can get more details about this from this particular paper. So this academic has done a lot of work in this domain. Okay, so that's my last slide, but I'm going to leave you with some questions that you can think about. And of course, the reading list that are all the citations that I've given you through the lecture. So we have seen that if the reward and survival systems are the result of evolution, so this is what has been ascribed, the emergence of these dopamine systems and so on. So they are the result of evolution if they are autonomous. So they act independently of us. They merely respond to what the world is throwing at you. This is my first question. Do we have free will? Something for you to think about. I'll give you one answer. Prior to that, I'll pose another question to you. This is the answer. I'll play that in a minute. If yes, how can it be controlled? You can either agree or disagree whether we have free will or not. If you do think that we have free will, then can we control it? So then again, it becomes a circular loop. If I can control it, does it again mean that I have free will? Have I done it out of my own free will, or was I forced to do it? It's a very circular argument. Let's not get in that. So what I want to tell you here is, so we came from the phenomena of the machine zone. We tried to explain with psychology. We went one level deeper to the neuroscience aspects. What do you think is the next level deeper beyond this? Sorry? No. I don't mean technology-wise. I mean conceptually in terms of topics. Philosophy. You have no abstraction. At least with the brain, you can use all your new tools and techniques to measure what's happening. Beyond that, I don't know. Thank you. I'll show you this answer, and then we can wind up the lecture. So this is a second part of that video that I had shown you earlier by Professor Skinner.
Where does that leave free will? Because we all think we have a choice whether to do things or not to do things.
Yes. Well, you see, it leaves it in the position of a fiction. We have assumed somehow or other that these internal states, feelings, and so on have initiated something. They have started something. They have created. We have done something in a voluntary way. We have willed to act. If you now look at the actual history, we find that there are external reasons why this has happened. In other words, by discovering the causes of behavior, we can dispose of the imagined internal cause. We dispose of free will as an American divine of the 18th century, Jonathan Edwards, did. He said, we believe in free will because we know about our behavior, but not about its causes. And of course, it's the object of a science of behavior to discover causes. And once you have found those causes, there is less you need to attribute to an internal act or will, and eventually, I think, you need to attribute nothing to it.
I will end with that. Thank you very much indeed.
The reason why you haven't talked about VR, that's one of my questions. The second question is, are these insights being used in creating content for entertainment? Are these being used for creating TV show content and movie content?
I am sure they are. I am sure they are. I have not personally read papers on this topic, but I can give you a lead on that paper which I cited here, which gave a relation between how slot machine research can be used in the development of games. So maybe these virtual reality games is another implementation of games in the large. So yes, I think so. Yeah, you can definitely get leads from that paper by following the references and so on.
And with TV shows, we know that, like, for instance, like Netflix has a bunch of strategies to make sure that to enable binge watching and
yeah, so that has actually, so if you read that essay, if you go to the website of Mr. Harris, and so he has a lot of the terms that he uses there. So this is called what is known as a bottomless bowl. It never stops. You always keep getting new content. I mean, I've seen this with my son. My son sometimes, he creates fuss to eat, and we put him on YouTube, and I've always seen that he does not want to go full screen. Okay, he does not want to watch it full screen. Why? I have a feeling that he thinks he's going to miss out on all the cues, the other recommendations that come on the right side. And it never stops, right? Like you press one, it gives you 100 recommendations. You go to the next one, again you get 100 more. So this is what has been termed as a bottomless bowl. And this is what Mr. Harris feels is this is where the designers have to step in and say, look, I am not going to give you any more. Okay? These are all there is. Or if you do have to do something, then you search for it yourself. I am not going to keep on giving you cues, your variable ratio reinforcement. I am not going to give you that. Or at least that's how design should be made, so that it does not become one of these things. Yeah?
Machine zone, what extent keeps the children being more active in terms of brain activities?
Well, I mean, I think that's very debatable. I'm guessing that must be closely related to saying whether if you play violent video games, do you become violent? Is that somehow closely related?
No. When the students, when they use calculators, they use the art of mentally calculating what is 22 plus 28. They don't do that again, they want to use the calculator.
So,
in the same way,
yeah.
Because they are passive for so many of the games or anything like that, the brain is so inactive in terms of doing.
I don't know whether you can call it inactive. I mean, we have seen that there is experimental evidence to show that, your brain is actually very active. But the signals, I mean, the appropriate signals that it gives to, those parts of the brain which control, say, your physical movements and so on, those could be suppressed. And only those which enable you to get your satisfaction from virtual games or by sitting idle and being passively entertained, only those could be activated. It's not necessary that your brain stops working. It selectively activates and suppresses some parts of it. And that comes from learning and memory and so on.
No, the selectively activates, to what extent it helps in terms of improving human creativity or suppressing?
I don't have an answer to that. When you talk about creativity, that's a minefield, I think.
It's something very important for the advancement of digital art for the civilization.
So, I mean, would you call the development of this machine zone a creative endeavor? No, I mean, it has both parts.
But it doesn't contribute to human creativity.
I'm not in, I don't have the...
People who have done this development, they are creative, no doubt. But they didn't contribute to human creativity to make use of it.
The people who have built this, they are creative, but...
See, the very act of developing all these things, by using the creativity, they did.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that people who make use of them, they will be creative.
Yeah.
See, exactly, I mean, that's why the...
Like when I read a book, so using the book description of a character, I picturize a person, I picturize a place, but when I look at it in a movie, it restricts my creativity because they give this person is this person.
Yeah, reading books, novels, is far better than in terms of supporting human creativity.
Well, I think when you use phrases like better and bad, that's a very subjective opinion. I really don't know if it's objective. But anyway, I mean, if people in the audience have other opinions, please contribute.
Can some of these learnings be used positively? Have you seen that? So there's a lot of, for example,
yes, I think so.
tech startups, right?
Yeah.
That are out there pushing learning apps.
Yeah, sure.
Etc.
Sure.
Modern learning tools. And you can debate whether young children should have access to it or not, but can this have a positive reinforcement?
I think so, yes, I think so. I think, I mean, I have a friend who runs an automation company here in Bangalore, and I think lessons from behavioral psychology, for instance, can be used maybe fairly successfully in semi-automated, building of semi-automated equipment, such that the user's attention is not diverted too much. You know, like let's say that there's an operator who's at a machine for, somebody is at a machine for like 6-7 hours a day, and I'm sure after a while you get tired, distracted, you know, it may lead to more accidents and so on. But suppose you were to use some of these lessons that behavioral psychology offers, maybe you can try to minimize some of these things. I mean, like think of it that way, your fission, the discovery of the discovery of fission reaction, or the invention of it, there's both sides of the coin, right? You have an atom bomb on one side, you have nuclear power reactors on the other. So it depends on how you want to use it. You can use this.
But you have come across.
I personally have not, but I think it can be done.
G Healthcare had written this MRI scanner for children.
I'm sorry, say that again.
G Healthcare
Okay.
used this MRI scanner for children.
Okay.
They go to the hospital and they create theme-based MRI scanner, like the jungle park or something,
one close example that I can perhaps give is the use of these virtual reality devices in exercises. Like, you know, how can I make exercise more interesting? So, you know, you have these video game consoles that allow you to immerse yourself virtually. Now, maybe if you give these virtual rewards while you are there, you know, in rehabilitation, for instance, video game based rehabilitation, there I've seen there's a lot of, actually you're right, there's a lot of research work that has gone on in video game based rehabilitation. You know, like let's say that you want to bring about the activity of your arm, for instance, or your wrist. Maybe you had a stroke or some other issue because of which you lost activity of these arms. There are robotic devices that are coupled with virtual games that will make the experience of rehabilitation more interesting. There are indeed opportunities where you can use these, use the lessons that we have learned so far in making, in you know, maybe creating a positive difference, if you will.
Everyone's moving towards gamification.
Yeah.
So like I work in edtech too, and so even in our edtech, so if you spend more than a particular amount of time on the platform, you get virtual coins.
Exactly, yeah.
Which could again be used to buy other courses.
Yeah, yeah. Why? I mean, now you know why. That was my intention. I mean, you can use this in several places, but there are both sides to it. It's nice that you brought this up. So there you have it. You have one instance right there. Yeah. I'm sure all of you are hungry. Those neurotransmitters are being triggered. Thanks and all the best.